Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Wednesday, April 10th. And I'm going to go ahead and just say hello and sorry to the Twitch Twitch viewers, because I tried to set up dual streaming probably about a month ago, and I was just so busy and it was just such an afterthought. I never actually watched a video to see if the audio was working. OBS has this thing called a virtual camera that lets the open broadcast software be like a webcam that could be captured with other devices. It doesn't make it blatantly obvious, though. It doesn't have a warning to say audio is not included in that. It is literally just the video. So I never set up any of the things that would have been necessary to be set up to actually get the audio sources to go out to. So for what has probably been over a month, I've been streaming to Twitch with no audio at all, just completely silent. No game audio, no microphone audio, nothing. That being said, my viewership on Twitch and people's viewerships on Twitch, unless you are just a hot tub streamer, and even at that you have to be pretty successful, is so incredibly low that those videos barely were getting one view, and for every view I was getting, almost certainly people were watching it for less than a few seconds, hearing that there was no audio at all of any sort, and then turning it off, which those are the exact kind of negative views you don't want to get. Is you want to have high watch times, even though Twitch's desires are slightly different. They want 3 people chatting and interacting on average, which is kind of ridiculous that is their metric, is that they want human engagement for the most part with comments and chats, whereas increasingly YouTube evolved away from the likes and dislikes and the chats being something that they cared about, or just views in general being something that they cared about, in favor of watch time. So you have this interesting split where YouTube would be very happy with viewers that never comment, never thumbs up, never interact at all, and just watch a ton of videos. The kids, basically, kids being given iPads to watch what the parents assume is age-appropriate cartoons over and over again, whereas Twitch wants more interactive people, and thus they are curating an audience that is perhaps significantly different from what YouTube generally, YouTube's algorithm generally is looking for. It would be too extreme to say Twitch is exclusively looking for Sims, for lack of a better term, but they definitely give a lot of powers to super fans, let's call them that, who are going to be in the chat for hours and hours, talking back and forth, having this fake relationship with the streamers. Compare that to any Let's Player streamer who's got to actually pay attention to playing the game and can't interact and read all the comments if they start to overflow. It's no surprise that Twitch is mostly people that are barely playing video games or doing anything else other than just interacting with the chat, and thus the just chatting field obviously was advantaged to become the biggest category on Twitch. Which, in fairness, I am streaming right now and just chatting, because I don't know what else we really would call you playing Yu-Gi-Oh! and then going into video game news. Yeah. So what I would want to talk about here, as far as the catch-up section, is I'm still in the middle of a minor emergency. It's going seemingly in the right direction, and looks like it probably will sort itself out, but you never know. So I didn't really get too much done as far as what I've been doing for the past couple of weeks, which normally what I would be doing is playing video games and making video game footage, but in the past couple of weeks I knew I was gonna be unable to do that, so I bought a Steam Deck OLED. Maybe now in retrospect that was a little bit too much, because I really haven't been able to use it as much as I'd like to in as far as just in hours of usage. That being said, when I do use it, it is really a great device. It is just like, would you like a laptop that isn't so expensive or so fragile that you couldn't just have it on a pillow next to you in bed and fall asleep and not be too afraid of rolling over on it or knocking it off and breaking it? If you would like that, that's great. Would you like to have a laptop that is capable of running a Linux desktop operating system and doing almost everything you'd want to do on a desktop, while still being relatively the size of a Nintendo Switch, whereas a laptop itself tends to have a much bigger screen? And generally I would say, yes, I like bigger screens, but we really are, I think, going to hit a point where screens in better quality and screens that are just built into VR or AR glasses are going to be the move forward. And laptops eventually, I think, will just disappear completely in favor of AR glasses. Of course, there is a price ratio there. Like, there is not, there's a lot more expense that it will take to squeeze monitors into the size of glasses than it would to just put a monitor in a 17-inch, 19-inch space. And laptops also would have to squeeze in all the rest of their keyboard and equipment. Personally, I kind of feel like I'd like to see keyboards themselves go away in favor of, well, QWERTY keyboards in particular, in favor of stenographer style typewriters, and that we should have been teaching stenography as a way of typing from day one. But obviously typewriters couldn't do stenography originally, so we're leaning on the history. And really, you only need the typing in the scenario that is going to increasingly not exist, where you can't just talk to a computer or you can't interact in ways that don't require actual long amounts of typing. We might even see a resurgence of people, writers, novelists, writing by hand, just as a more pleasurable experience. Because all the technologies have been developed for decades. Certainly optical character recognition, even with handwriting, is plateaued to about as good as it's going to get. Speech to text technology is about as good as it's going to get. I believe this kind of deck is impossible to beat, so I'm going to give this a try, but then I probably should just surrender with my deck. There probably is a way to beat it elsewise, but don't think he can trigger anything else at this point. apparently I can't activate my ability either. So it's all going to come down here to this. Can this direct attack? If it can, then I can get Zeus, and then I can try and activate it. Zeus. But yeah, the Steam Deck, kind of a great device. Now, I do think that obviously a Steam Deck 2 has some room for improvements. You could easily do with a second USB-C connector, like, because there's just none on the bottom at all, and it would help if you wanted to plug in a device of some sort on the bottom. Or you could even have two on top, and most people still wouldn't complain about that. But just having one is kind of ridiculous, because you're immediately then required to plug in a hub into a docking station to charge it and plug in any other device you possibly would want to use. Which, since it doesn't have a webcam built in, and fair enough that it doesn't have a webcam built in, that's a probably great idea. If you were going to do any kind of webcam meetings, Zooms type meetings, you're going to have to buy some kind of webcam that's going to awkwardly attach to a Steam Deck that has no connection points to attach anything, which is another thing. It needs a base mount on the back, so you could potentially attach it to a mounting bracket or mounting arm, and with that you could also attach accessories to it. There is a 4-screw pattern, but it's not strong enough, I'm sure, to actually mount anything to it or have the Steam Deck hold from that. Or it could also do with some just little plastic inset rectangles where at the top and bottom, where you could snap something onto it from the top and bottom, and then it could just pressure fit into that. The bottom part, if you, at least on mine, there's some room for improvement on the quality of the actual physical build. The X button on mine is still very sticky. It seems like it's going in the right direction and getting better, but I am definitely seeing the X button, and really only the X button, because I'm only really pressing the X button to bring up the keyboard in desktop mode. It gets stuck far too often, and I know it's going to eventually wear itself down, and it'll stop sticking in the downward position. But it's kind of crazy to have a Steam Deck for over a week now, and week and a half about, and the button still is sticky, and it's just not it should probably be pre-worn down and tested, every unit being tested with a certain number of button presses to make sure it doesn't stick. The bottom edge doesn't feel like it has enough plastic support in it, and so if you happen to grab the Steam Deck by the bottom edge, which I do occasionally, it's just kind of creaky. It makes a little creaky sound, like, oh, this feels a little bit too much like a toy and not enough like a sturdier device. I have really no problem with the weight of the Steam Deck. It's pretty heavy already, so maybe if they added a little bit too much weight by having more of a wet metal frame or thicker plastic frame, that might be a problem, but I would much prefer it to be slightly heavier by a few fractions of an ounce than to grab the bottom part and feel like, oh, if I grab this with a lot of force, I might be able to press in on it and, who knows, maybe even crack the screen alongside the edge part. But the vast majority of what I've been doing with the Steam Deck has been based on the software side, and SteamOS is from day one. As soon as I first launched desktop mode in SteamOS, it felt very rough and like it needed a lot of improvements, and yeah, it's still very much that case. One of the things that's the biggest problem of SteamOS is kind of the confusion of what is it. Certainly, in that SteamOS is technically based off of Arch Linux, but you really can't install much of anything using the Arch Linux Pacman package manager and an AUR repository. One, because the operating system is locked down and read-only, but two, I just don't think they've put as many repositories in there as you might want to. Instead, they want you to do everything in the Sandbox newer way of installing applications, which is Flatpaks, which works 99% of the time, but not always. One experiment I've been doing has been to how am I going to get video from the Steam Deck to YouTube in some way. And ideally, what I would have wanted to do is have OBS installed via Flatpak on the Steam Deck, and then use the OBS running on Steam Deck to capture game footage and stream it via a proprietary software called NDI, Nutex NDI, to the OBS on my main computer, which would then capture the footage and stream it. And even though Flatpak has something labeled OBS NDI, I've realized that FlatHub's repository of applications doesn't really account for what are effectively just assistive tool programs. And the whole thing is just so new that there's just not enough feedback or guidance, particularly on the Steam Deck and SteamOS, which is way more locked down than most Arch Linux-based things. Now, a lot of times I will talk about KDE, and particularly KDE Plasma, the desktop environment, but that is not, to my understanding, the actual operating system that SteamOS is built around. The KDE desktop environment Plasma is just a large chunk of what SteamOS is using, and so inherently there's a lot of stuff going on there and a lot of room for confusion. So in my experiment, which this is one of the few things I did accomplish over the past couple days, I realized that the proprietary software for NDI really would only work if you go into a low-level command line and install it that way. Install the proprietary part of the software. And what is labeled as OBS NDI in Flatpak is in fact only a support system that interconnects the other softwares, OBS and NDI. There is another couple of programs that I'd really like to see work, and I would like to see them to work because in theory I'd like to see it work, but in reality the truth is I don't know if the technology has ever worked, and that is Miracast, or Miraclecast is the name of one program, or GNOME Network Displays. This is effectively Linux trying to to integrate itself with the Chromecast features. But on the Steam Deck, it's not going to work. Should have summoned this probably a little bit quicker. Yeah, it is because, again, while GNOME Miracle Cast is not in a Flatpak form, GNOME Networked Displays is in Flatpak form. But once again, to actually get it to work would require SteamOS, aka Valve, to really expect it to work, and Valve has no interest, it's pretty obvious, to making any real improvements on the desktop mode over just improving the gaming mode. Which, yeah, that's fairly reasonable, because certainly they are coming from the perspective that this would be a gaming mode first device. But yeah, that certainly is the reason why out of the box, when you get into desktop mode, it is very much a non-customized, not designed well mode that is pretty much your basic settings of what I imagine Arch Linux with KDE Plasma is out of the box. Let's see. So yeah, the story ends with a I'm sorry for pausing there, with a kind of happy ending though. In that the main goal here is I gotta figure out a way that the Steam Deck can do two scenarios. One, my computer's broken or something, but I still want to make footage, so I just have no ability to make footage with my gaming PC, which is still obviously going to be more powerful than the Steam Deck. Although, in fairness, the Steam Deck is a very, very powerful device. It's, I think, in a class of its own as far as just what it has going for it. But obviously it has some limitations too, in that it is 1280 by 800 resolution, so you're not getting a 1080p signal from it. So that's one scenario, is that I would have to live within a much more limited space of what games can be played on the Steam Deck, and just how I'd be recording things there. In that I can use OBS from FlatHub to just record video. I haven't actually experimented with it, but everything definitely looks like I could do that. There'll need to be probably some tricks there. I probably would want to map some key combination to start recording, and noticeably on the Steam Deck that would have to almost be a combination of like back trigger buttons or something, which I'm constantly hitting the back trigger buttons, and so that's not very good either. But yeah, maybe the start button would be the best button to start recording and map to a hotkey for OBS. And certainly I don't think I can get very tricky with OBS on the Steam Deck. I can maybe get my subscribe animation to play at the beginning, but I'm not going to get super crazy with it with a bunch of advanced scene switcher scripts or things like that. The other scenario is a scenario I've run into recently, which is that there are on occasion, on a very rare occasion, a couple games that just don't run well on my computer. Or they just don't run at all. Mickey's Castle of Illusion is the one that stands out, certainly. That's a game I wanted to play, and really that's been about the first game in at least 5 years that I've really run into that has just run incredibly terrible to the point I can't even play it. Although there are way too many incidences lately of running into games that have lagging or stuttering, and I question if some of that isn't just my AMD Ryzen CPU overclocking itself or just being incompatible. That being said, we clearly are at the beginnings of a new generation in which almost all games are going to be focused more on AMD CPUs at the very least. And PC gaming, I wouldn't be surprised if it starts to even shift away from NVIDIA graphics cards at some level, as far as gaming goes, because every single other console is running an AMD ATI, which AMD owns ATI now, configuration. And frankly, we are moving to a point of just shared RAM, in which even PCs are going to have RAM being shared at the highest speeds possible between CPUs and GPUs. Which, that'll definitely change things if that fully gets implemented. So, yeah, I keep wandering off, but to finish the story, I did figure out how to stream in that second scenario games to my computer. It is weird to say the least. First of all, Steam has this secondary app called the Steam Link app, and weirdly you can't just install it and own it in your library. You have to actually, it is listed on Steam, but then it just has links to download links. So what you're going to want to do, and it's not a very good or smooth experience, is you need to probably disconnect in part. Well, how did I do it? Yeah. You're going to want to install Steam Link on your PC that you're going to record on. So Windows PC for me. So you install the Steam Link app on Windows. Then you're going to want to exit out from desktop mode, is what I did, of Steam on your Steam Deck. And then at that point, you're going to... what I'm saying sounds backwards, but I swear I did it this way. Then you're going to run the Steam Link app that you've also installed on your desktop mode of your Steam Deck from FlatHub. And then you're going to probably have to click other computer, and then you're going to get a number code, and then you're going to connect the two together. And then after doing all that, I rebooted my Steam Deck. Obviously, I'm going to have to rethink how I did this or reinvestigate this. I did have it working, but what you're effectively doing, it would make a lot more sense certainly to say you should exit out of Steam on your main computer that you're going to be doing the recording, and then just run the Steam Link app, and maybe that is something that would work just as well. But effectively what you have to do is you have to get Steam to stop being directly connected to your Steam Deck. Whereas when the first initial setup, you are just going to be directly connected to your Steam Deck in what is just labeled as being connected, instead of it being labeled as being paired. And then there's a few settings you're going to want to fix. In that you, by default, are going to get notifications on the overlay if the wireless connection, which inherently the wireless connection is poor, and wireless video streaming in general has just always been poor. I think the bandwidth is there, I just don't think the software is there. Wi-Fi 6, Wi-Fi 6E, Wi-Fi 7, all of those should be fast enough to stream video fairly well within a local Wi-Fi connection, as long as you're not going through a VPN or the internet. But yeah, it does need some tweaking to turn off the user interface. You probably want to cap it to 60 frames per second. You probably want to put it in low latency mode. There's advanced options to turn on HEVC. That's probably a good thing to turn on. And then there's probably a decent argument that if it does a speed test and tells you can do 25, turn it down to like 10 megabits per second. 10 megabits per second streaming is actually really high, to my understanding. So yeah, and you can certainly play with it within the limitation of the pull down menu as far as how high you want it to go. But yeah, when all is said and done, I managed to get the Steam app in desktop mode and in gaming mode, and you probably want to play in gaming mode, to stream to the Steam Link app on my computer. And so the Steam Link app is generous enough that it will show you the desktop mode and everything else. So it isn't a case where it's only going to exclusively capture the video of full screen apps or games only that have been whitelisted. It does just seem to capture everything. And so yeah, that would be one way to do it. Although arguably, for the frustration of this and the fact that the Steam Deck doesn't have any Chromecasting abilities or Apple AirPlay abilities, maybe you can install Kodi and use the media streaming functions in that to make it a universal plug and play server and AirPlay that way. But with none of that really set up out of the box, there is definitely an argument to instead just have a USB-C to HDMI cord and a cheap capture card. Spend maybe $50 for a really long USB-C to HDMI cord and just plug it in directly, and then you don't have any of those problems. You're not running another application that is streaming video on both your recording computer side and your Steam Deck, and so you can potentially get more frame rates. There definitely were scenarios where if I turned the video from the balanced mode to beautiful mode, there was a lot of lag. There's definitely latency to be seen while streaming the game to the Steam Link, which, yeah, I imagine you potentially could eventually get used to it, but I'm not really sure you ever would want to get used to the amount of latency and just delay you will see on the screen watching a bigger screen. So it's going through the wireless, it's really not a solution to use Steam Link that much. much as you would like it to work. And that's why Steam Link's, the physical devices, never really got as much acclaim from the technical side, because there's just too much latency in it. And you're going to see the latency more on a Steam Deck anyways, because you can look down on your own screen and see that when you jump, I was playing the Mickey Mouse game, when you jump as Mickey on the screen, he's jumping as fast as you press the button, or as you would normally expect in a game. And then when you try and just use the Steam Deck as a controller and look on the screen and you press the jump button, you're noticing that there's 300 to maybe even 800 milliseconds of delay between when you press the button and when he jumps. It's not bad enough that I couldn't play that way, but it is bad enough to be noticeable. So I would say Steam Link, which the Steam Link app is installable on a Chromecast. So you definitely do have a situation here where if you wanted to play a game on your Steam Deck and let other people watch you play, the Steam Link as a concept works. With a Chromecast to do that, the Steam Link app does. But if you wanted to play on a big screen, and actually control things, almost certainly you're better off just having a dock, and not going through wireless, and instead just not going through wireless, and just having a dock that would be HDMI out, and then you would dock the Steam Deck, and then you would control it with a Xbox controller, which in fairness, even though I think they've done a remarkably good job with the smaller buttons and the different layout on the Steam Deck, it's still not really a big-handed person's controller. Like, I could see being happier if the buttons were exactly the same size and the exact same layout of the Steam Deck, and then there was just touchpads added, like, even lower, and the screen was just bigger, and the whole thing was just bigger. If there was an extra large or extra large version of the Steam Deck, I would be happy with that. Now, in fairness, I'd be way more happy if they made an extra large version of the Switch, because those buttons and Joy-Cons are incredibly small. But yeah, Steam Link is really the only way to stream video that I can find, short of just plugging it in, and it really is only useful with a Chromecast to let other kids watch you while you're playing, instead of having kids looking over your shoulder, which is probably the vast majority of it. It does bring about an interesting point too, and this is something that I'll file a feature request that will probably never be seen. There doesn't seem like there is any kind of peer-to-peer Wi-Fi networking setup on the Steam Deck. The features are there in the Wi-Fi card. Peer-to-peer would also be needed to do the Chromecast casting, so the features hardware-wise are said to be there, but more than just Chromecasting, which is probably going to be a no priority for SteamOS, would be if the Steam Deck ever became popular, that people were going around playing each other. There's no way to have a local Wi-Fi LAN party, which would be, I guess, a wireless LAN party, and without any internet to connect to it. And again, that's probably because Steam effectively is DRM, and Steam has really no interest in spending any energy to make a scenario where you could play games offline. And they fully expect that if you are going to be playing multiplayer games, that you will be doing it by both being connected to the internet and connecting to internet servers. Which, yeah. So it's pretty obvious why there isn't a feature like that. Might be able to win in this first turn. Let's see. See if we can pull this off completely. So I'm gonna start with this one. Let's take a moment to read this card and just see what it does. Nothing of importance. And I'm gonna do this one. There are 2 cards in there. What's the best way to do this? $1,600, $1,200, yeah. Actually, I think I can pull this off. I think if I do this and destroy this, at least that maybe will get me a daily quest. And if we do that, this is an odd way to play. Normally I wouldn't go in this order with these cards. So yeah, that's pretty much everything I've learned in the past couple days as far as trying to stream. Which has certainly just been more distractions on me finishing the code, the script that I was writing. Oh, I can only do one. Interesting. But we can take it further. Certainly. Thought I could do that twice. I think that is a 1-turn win. I want to really do the math. Otherwise, I want to do a shout out to KDE Connect or K Connect. It's K Connect is the name of it from KDE. They've released this app, and it's inherently designed to be used with KDE Linux. But there is literally no limitation to it actually having to integrate with Linux at all. It is an app that you would install on your cell phones, or your Steam Deck, or your computer, or your laptop. And I'm saying "or" here, but the reality is you would install it to all of them. They have a version available for basically every operating system: iOS, Android, Mac OS, Windows, Linux. Maybe they don't have a BSD version. That would be about it, and anything else that would be really, really obscure. You install it, it does a little networking discovery between each other. It sets up an encrypted key sharing procedure that you have to type in a little code like Bluetooth pairing. And then there's just a massive amount of plugins. So by default, the first thought would be that it would just move files between a cell phone and a computer without having to plug in a cell phone, but you very rarely want to have to just plug in your cell phone into a computer to move files. Very rarely are you moving files though, because Google's concept on that has definitely been pushed to the extreme that you would instead have a... Yeah, I guess I could have used this card as a... I should have used that. Yeah, Google's idea is that you would put everything in Google Drive, and then you'd fill up your Google Drive, and then they demand payments, which they... All of those things started off as being basically free, unlimited storage, and then they changed the terms of the deal and made it cost money. With K-Connect, you don't have any of that. You just move it over your Wi-Fi from one device directly, and you don't have any cloud involvement at all, which I'm sure there's a decent number of people who are security conscious who love that idea of having no cloud integration. But that's really just the surface level of what K-Connect does. In reality, it does a heck of a lot more. It lets your cell phone be an extra mouse, an extra keyboard, a presenter button to do slideshows, so it's just showing you a button to go forward in a slideshow, back on a slideshow. It lets you send notifications from one device to the other, so if you want to get your cell phone notifications to pop up on your laptop when you're looking at your laptop screen, you could do that. I wouldn't really recommend that. It lets you control music or anything that you would be playing on your cell phone from your laptop or vice versa. Most of this is vice versa. And it's just like at least 6, probably closer to 9 to 12 functions and apps that you otherwise would have as separate apps, all being rolled into one. I was really gung-ho on an app called Local Send to send files back and forth. K-Connect does that and a lot more, and does it better. And having only one app certainly helps there. And frankly, it's just insane that you have a Linux desktop environment doing what really should have been done by Microsoft and Apple and Google years ago. Like, there should have been at least 3 proprietary apps that did everything that K-Connect does right now for Windows, for Mac OS, for iOS, for Google, for Android. And ideally you would have hoped that they could have gotten on the same page and worked together and created some kind of interconnected standard, but they didn't even get that far. They didn't even get to the idea. And it just makes so much sense that devices should work together. Okay, I see on the chat on YouTube we have Musin Jackson said, "Glad you're not running full armored OMG, everyone is abusing it. How you doing, Rydo? Running Raspberry Pi and on Master Duel." Cry face. Fry. I'm not running a Raspberry Pi right now. I'm running a powerful gaming computer. I did briefly launch Master Duel on my Steam Deck, and it seemed like running it on the Steam Deck with remote play was causing it to re-download like 9 gigabytes of data, which I'm gonna have to investigate that. Weirdly, I was testing out remote play because you would think that remote play wouldn't do anything to a game to require it to download any more data, since it would just be my strong computer gaming PC streaming the video to the Steam Deck, which is all remote play is. As far as running Master Duel on Raspberry Pi, you could do it if you're running one of the Linux operating systems that is running Android, but I haven't heard anything recently to say that any of the Android builds for a Raspberry Pi 5 even were particularly powerful enough to do that. Maybe somebody has done it out there, I just haven't researched it. I'm not that interested in gaming off of a Raspberry Pi. Raspberry Pi in general has lost a lot of its momentum in that the Raspberry Pi 5 is a little too expensive, and yet it's nowhere comparable to a Steam Deck, which is way more expensive, but it's not really giving you much more than what a Raspberry Pi 3B Plus or even a Raspberry Pi 4 was giving you as far as gaming emulation. We just haven't seen that generational leap where on a Raspberry Pi 3B Plus you could do some Nintendo 64 games, and then on a 4 and a 5 you can do some more Nintendo 64 games. That there hasn't really been that jump to say now it's powerful enough to emulate GameCube games or Wii games, or maybe you could do some PS1 games on the Raspberry Pi 3B Plus, and maybe you can do a few PS2 games on the Raspberry Pi 5, but that's about it. I definitely can't recommend, unless your kids are really young, or you're really only into playing old NES, Super NES, Nintendo 64 games. Yeah, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to get a Raspberry Pi, and even at that, they just haven't updated RetroPie as an operating system built enough to make it interesting. It does certainly explain why KDE Plasma, which is on the Steam Deck as a flavor of a desktop environment, has been off my radar, is because I have been, in the past few years, much more into the Debian, Ubuntu, well, Debian in particular, operating systems. And so I would have said that the GNOME desktop environment that Debian used, I think they're still using it, would have been the most popular desktop environment still, or that maybe Linux Mint's version of their desktop environment, their flavor of it, is the most popular. And I really had not heard anything about KDE coming out of nowhere. One thing that is slightly concerning as far as the Steam Deck and SteamOS is that the next version of KDE Plasma is the next version of KDE Plasma is going to get away from using X11 window compositing, which probably means nothing to say out loud, but it might mean, since they're moving to the newer Wayland style window compositing, that a lot of Proton and Windows emulation might struggle to be ported over in the long run if SteamOS can get to KDE Plasma 6. Video will perform a lot better, but in the short run there may be a lot of bugs and bug fixes that need to be done. Muzin Jackson came back on the chat and he says he's playing on a Raspberry Pi. I'd be interested to hear how that works. Like, what resolution is it running at? Is it running a smooth 60 frames per second? Are you running Android on the Raspberry Pi, or have you figured out some other ARM-based desktop version? Like, I don't think Chimera OS has a Raspberry Pi build. I would assume your best bet would be to be running some some variant of Android on the Raspberry Pi. You probably aren't getting the most amount of advantages of a Raspberry Pi being such a small device. It is really a device that's smaller than it needs to be in a lot of scenarios, particularly if you're talking video games, because if you put like a touchscreen Pi hat on a Raspberry Pi, that's going to be way too small at like a 5-inch screen to really play with a stylus and play Master Duel in particular. You're going to have to immediately, I would assume, plug it into at least a 7-inch screen. You're probably going to want to plug in a wireless mouse or wired mouse, I guess, maybe would work. But yeah, that's in part why the laptop variants that they built, the Chromebook equivalents that they built for the Raspberry Pis, started to make a little bit more sense for physical form factor if you really are going to do things with it. Let's see, did I do anything else with the Steam Deck today, in the past couple days? No, I've mostly been carrying it around and not doing anything. There is a waiting room scenario that I was expecting to have, where I would sit in a waiting room and not be expected to interact or entertain anyone else. And that's where the Steam Deck made a lot of sense. Now I'm in less of a waiting room scenario and more in a entertaining and interacting with other people scenario. So I can carry the Steam Deck around, and if I find some time I can play with it, but in reality I am carrying it around like a briefcase and never really pulling it out. I've had my first scenario where the Steam Deck case was on its side and it fell over 2.5 inches really to lying flat, and seemingly nothing happened from that, but certainly in the back of my mind I'm going to document every single time the Steam Deck falls over or potentially gets touched, or potentially I touch it with like slightly wet hands and things like that, like, because it is just a little too expensive of a device to not mourn, if that's the right word, if something breaks with it, even if it broke 5 years from now. Yeah, and that is definitely a big problem with it too, is that if you're getting the OLED version at $600, you're gonna have to be so precious with that. And $600 is an interesting thing because I had no business owning an iPack PDA when I was much younger. Like, I was very much a early adopter, and I was way too young, and I definitely didn't have the $600 that was spent to gift me the PDA, which I dropped that iPack PDA at least 2 or 3 times and managed to convince iPack to refurbish it and fix it. In particular, it was definitely a device not designed well, so it would just break even if it fell an inch onto the ground. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if there was actually an impact sensor in it that broke it intentionally every time it fell. But yeah, I was an incredibly early adapter to PDAs, well before the cell phones, smartphones came out. Cell phones had come out, but smartphones hadn't. And so I was effectively wandering around with a PDA for years, using a computer in my pocket when nobody else had anything close to that. Definitely didn't accomplish anything with it, really. It was something I was kind of stupidly wasting my time with because I was still in school and needed to waste my time somehow and keep myself busy while being bored out of my mind in school. So I had this book, physical pocket guide, and I was attempting to manually transcribe it. Even at the time, this was probably stupid, and I was just young and didn't know better, because the book was probably even at that point already transcribed into a PDF or type file. And it certainly was a different time where I felt like the knowledge in that book would benefit me and possibly even society, being digital in the future, when certainly that wasn't really what happened, because the internet came along, and with the advent of the internet, almost all knowledge became accessible to everyone at all times, if not almost all knowledge, a significant amount of knowledge. And yeah, the Steam Deck is just nothing like that. It is way more capable, it's way more doable. In comparison, I could install a program called Calibre that would just be a library that would hold millions of ebooks. You can find online in torrents and things, or even legitimately ridiculous amounts of ebooks. Project Gutenberg is a legitimate source for ebooks that you can download. You can basically have every public domain book you would want on a Steam Deck running through Calibre, and it really wouldn't even take up that much space, as long as you're not downloading the versions with massive amounts of pictures. If anything, it will take you way more time organizing or curating a collection of books. And an iPack at $550 decades ago was probably really closer to $1,200 to $1,500 in value by today's dollars, just due to inflation. And it really couldn't do much of anything. Like maybe 2 or 3 games you could be played on it, and that's pretty much it. Yeah, there was a notepad app, there was maybe 2 or 3 games, calculators, address books, calendars, things like that. The software to connect an iPack to a Windows computer was incredibly limited and slow. You could send data through infrared, but it almost never worked. Most of the time you had to plug it into a dock, and the dock was connecting via a pre-USB RS-232 connection, serial port on a computer. And that's one of the few things, as I'm kind of just rambling here, that I like about technology, is that it has just grown in leaps and bounds, and hopefully it will continue to just grow in leaps and bounds, and that what once would have been completely unthinkable is now just the normal situation. Sometimes that turns out to be bad outcomes. For instance, you have the fact that in the old days, before cell phones, you would just be gone for 8 hours when you went to work, and you wouldn't have people that could immediately demand your time. Sometimes that's a good thing, but sometimes that is just also creating too much burdens as far as juggling relationships and interactions throughout the day. But for the most part, most people would agree that cell phones and being available all the time is a good thing. I don't think this is gonna work. This will be the last game I play. With all the tweaks I'm making on the Steam Deck, what I know I'm gonna want to do some kind of videos, and what I think I'll probably do is try to make one video that's just rather long and break it up into chapter descriptions. That's my thought. Because they no longer really care about views on YouTube. In the old days, it would have made a lot of sense to break it down into multiple videos and maybe try and pad it with an intro and outro in the front. But in modern days, one long video with chapters makes a lot more sense. And it probably will be a very rambly video. I'll probably try and even script out a little bit of what I would want to talk about. I see Russo Ack on the chat saying yo. Hi. So yeah, I put some more thought into that. Now inherently though, that is also going to be really annoying, because if I make what is effectively going to be a how-to video on my channel once again, the last time I did that, I got a massive amount of subscribers and views, and then none of them really came back and ever watched another one of my videos, because they just weren't interested in the long play video game critique or video game news that I do on live streams. And at some point, I guess if I'm successful enough, I'll consider splitting my channel up and putting the news on its own thing, but I can only really do that after I got back to being monetized. I saw there was a chat message I didn't see, so I may not be seeing all the chat messages, and apologies if I'm not. From the last stream where somebody asked if I'm a professional, and technically the answer to that is yes. Exactly once YouTube paid me $100 when I was in the YouTube Partner Program, when you needed only 100 subscribers to be in the YouTube Partner Program. So if you're paid even once, you are technically a professional by somebody else. That is the low bar of being a professional. In reality, would you really call somebody a professional if they've made $100 in over 10 years of making a YouTube channel? Probably not. You could certainly call me a failed professional. I am up to 800 subscribers. I still would need 4 times as many views as far as watch time. Not views, but watch time. So I'd need to get 200 more subscribers and everybody who is watching my videos to watch 4 times as long to even begin to be entered into the new rules of the YouTube Partner Program. And I imagine I wouldn't be making anywhere close to a living wage even at those levels. And certainly it would be nice and helpful and downright almost a miracle if that did happen. But I'm also just not holding my breath for that to happen. I do have the slight advantage of having a lot of old content that if the algorithm started to recommend my old content to people after I was monetized, I might have this continuous passive income, but those are all just big ifs. Yeah, roughly I would like to see somewhere around $2,000 to $2,500 of income a month to pay all the bills and just be in a really good financial situation. And yeah, you're just not likely to get that unless you're a super successful YouTuber, and I'm not even sure that a lot of the YouTubers who look successful are making that much. But I did want to answer that question. So 3 more wins and I'll get to gold tier 1, and 3 more wins in a row to get to platinum. And then since today is April 10th, it puts me in a decent position, frankly, to maybe do something extra this month and maybe try to get to diamond. But I would still question that heavily, because I imagine there's just going to be an event that happens, and that event is going to potentially take up all my time. Right, I'm looking at my Twitter feed here. Here we have a Video Games Chronicle update to a story we were going to talk about, where EA has said they don't normally comment on rumors, but there's no validity to this story. EA has claimed there was a rumor here. The work on the Dead Space 2 remake has reportedly been shelved following the lackluster sales of the first game, with developer motive now focused on Iron Man and Battlefield titles. Which, yeah, I definitely was going to talk about that. The one example of competition and capitalistic competition that I can really point to actually working was the Dead Space 1 remake by EA being in direct competition with the other game that came out from a new company that was made from allegedly the creator of Dead Space 1. But that other game that was made from the alleged creator of Dead Space 1, I say alleged because video game creation is really very much collaborative, and whenever anybody says they were the creators of a video game, it is one person out of a team of 30 or somewhere around that ratio that are at that new company trying to sell a new game, new concept on that. Callisto Protocol was the name of the game, now that I remember. So the one slight example of capitalistic competition helping the consumer was that we got a Dead Space 1 remake, and now the rumor, even though it's been denied by EA, is that they're not even going to bother to remake the rest of the series because they've already done what they obviously wanted to do, which is steal the air out of the room and steal all the excitement around the Callisto Protocol by rushing out a remake of Dead Space 1 and getting all that money. Now, of course, the Callisto Protocol itself shot itself in the foot by just not being a good game, but it also, still, if it was a great game, would have probably failed pretty horribly just because EA has that extra money to crush competition and crush the little guy. It very much was a David and Goliath scenario. You have this brand new company with far fewer resources making a game. Now, arguably, maybe they shouldn't have referenced Dead Space or mentioned Dead Space, but it definitely is just a case of EA being EA as we know them, as far as just being money hungry and jerks in general. And so they rushed out Dead Space 1. Which, yeah. Now, in this scenario, if you're to believe the rumors, which I wouldn't be surprised if there is some truth to the rumors, and honestly, I didn't have a lot of hope that Dead Space 2 was ever going to be remade, or it wouldn't be remade in a timely manner. And who knows what they're going to do with Dead Space 3 if they even got to that point, because you basically have to start from scratch on that game and make something new called Dead Space 3. But yeah, I didn't have a lot of hope that that was going to happen particularly well, even before the Callisto Protocol proved itself to be unsuccessful. And so now I have even less hope. Let's go through the stories that are actually on the screen, though. Power Wash Simulator developer Future Lab has been acquired by Miniclip, which Power Wash Simulator definitely has been a fairly popular meme-ish streamer game. It makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I imagine there's just a lot of people out there that would love the idea of power washing a bunch of things, but don't want to also ruin surfaces with a power washer, because they can be very destructive if you're not careful and not skilled and not trained how to use it. Let's see. There was this big news story from Gamatsu covering all the announcements in the III initiative. It was a 45-minute showcase that happened about 52 minutes ago, slightly more than that, I imagine. And so that's pretty much the big news for today. From that, Ubisoft and Evil Empire have announced the Rogue Prince of Persia, which is a rogue-like game, it seems like. The Rising DLC of Legacy of Castlevania gameplay trailer, which it definitely is getting to the point where Castlevania is almost going to become this myth that future generations of gamers are going to think that Castlevania as a game never existed, even though there's been a ton of them, and that Castlevania is just this fairy tale of Dracula that is cross-promoted in DLC of multiple games. A game called Mouse Spike D gameplay teaser and trailer and screenshots. The game is called Mouse, I guess. Definitely being inspired by Mickey Mouse, although there's definitely some Pluto elements here. Spinach and a anchor tattoo. Although Pluto is probably public domain too, so that's probably not a problem. Tachia for the Switch, launching June 27th. Brotato DLC Abyss Terrors and free local co-op update. Let's School coming to the PS4, Xbox One, and Series and Switch this summer. This is an interesting highlight in that my plugin that rewrites this, where it says PS4/5, that's not how Gamatsu actually wrote the headline. It's rewriting it so it's easier to read for me, and it works anywhere on these web pages. So now this was written this way. A single player RKGK Rakugaki announced for PC. Undermine 2 announced for PC. Never Alone 2 has been announced. I recently got around finally to playing Never Alone 1, and it would be a hard sell, frankly, to play Never Alone 2. The platforming in Never Alone 1 is fairly lackluster, and there's just not anything really special about it. And the actual story in the actual gameplay is a little bit lackluster and just kind of not very pointed in its meaning or emphasis or theming. In part, a big reason for that is that Never Alone, half of the game was live action videos in a documentary style. Almost certainly there was some kind of extra funding they got to be historical and make this PBS style documentary about First Nations, sometimes known as Eskimo tribes, although they don't really get into what tribe they're talking about. And so you're platforming and interacting based on these stories that don't feel like they have full beginning, middles, and ends. One of the things I think in particular that was kind of strange about Never Alone 1 is that you're playing as this little girl, and the story that they seem to have been telling is actually would have been a story of a male, and they just went a little SJWE and made it a little girl instead. But yeah, so if there are more traditional Eskimo First Nation stories that can be told in Never Alone, I'd like to see them, but I'd also like to see a game that's actually worth playing, because otherwise it creates this weird situation where you'd be better off just making a PBS documentary video and showing it that way, and not trying to integrate a video game into this story you're telling, which makes it actually less accessible, certainly. In similar ways, we have seen that biblical stories, or the story of Jesus, has been really poorly adapted to only a few games, and very few people have even tried to do that at all, when it makes sense that there should be at least one biblical story game. But the problem there is, in either case, when you start having a character interact in a set in stone story that is also followed with some spirituality, it becomes very quickly blasphemous to have Jesus like having a gun or striking somebody, punching somebody, when the Bible didn't say he did that, or even Jesus walking left when the Bible said he walked right. Same is true for the more oral passed down stories. That's a big problem with the First Nation stories too, is that they are just passed down. They're done in, I think, kind of spoken word presentations doing around drum circles. There's depicted on the tusks of walruses and carved into things. It's just not, it's not really a story that was thought out by one person and never and set in stone. It's evolved in every retelling, which certainly some people would say that's the beauty in those stories, is that it evolves in every retelling. Moving on, Vampire Survivors is coming to the PS4 and PS5 this summer, and DLC Operation Guns featuring Contra characters is being added. Vampire Survivors still probably has some steam in it, so it makes a lot of sense for them to continue to put out some DLC until it stops being so big of a deal. Although I bet there aren't too many people new coming to Vampire Survivors, and this DLC probably won't help with that. A game called Gestalt Steam and Cinder for PC launches May 21st. We'll look at all of these games when we go through the main news, which we'll do fairly quickly here. Dino Lords has a teaser trailer, which that's an interesting title. Shadows of Doubt is adding a PS5 and Xbox Series versions with early access Sharpshooter Assassin update now available. And a arcade-inspired isometric shooter called Kill Knight was announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. Noticeably, not a lot of these are big names. Slay the Spire 2 being announced, which is yet another card game. There's been a little bit too much of that. And yeah, that's all Komatsu has for the III initiative. And yeah, I don't know if I really call Prince of Persia a big name at this point. Definitely feels like Ubisoft is really just cashing in on the Prince of Persia title when something like this could have easily just been called Assassin's Creed the Rogue. The Rogue Assassin's Creed, as much as it could have been Prince of Persia. The last Prince of Persia game that came out, you're also not playing as the Prince of Persia, which, yeah, that doesn't make the most sense to have Prince of Persia in the name and then more than likely not play as anybody that in the beginning could even start to sound like they were a prince. The way this is labeled, where it says the Rogue Prince of Persia, it would make more sense to just call it the Rogue Prince, comma, of Persia, and have the Rogue Prince at the top. But what does that even mean? The last game also not feeling like any of the Sands of Times game or the original Prince of Persia games, and this Rogue game probably isn't going to feel much like that either. So there's just a real disconnect as far as what is Prince of Persia even supposed to mean. Let's see, Video Games Chronicle says an $80 Call of Duty Kong glove is not worth it. The fans are claiming players have to purchase 4 separate packs to acquire the item. And yeah, this is ridiculous on a multitude of levels, that you're buying 4 separate packs and you're getting a King Kong character in Call of Duty that's getting a metal glove, and you're paying $80 for that privilege to be that ridiculous. What is even Call of Duty at this point that you're getting Kong x Godzilla film cross-promotional content? But yeah, we constantly need to put out as much pushback as we can possibly make against this kind of nonsense, even though it doesn't seem like it matters. It's better to speak up and watch the industry potentially oversaturate itself with bad elements like this than to stay silent. At the very least, maybe we could slow the shitification, is the word that's been coined, of video games. Although, particularly in the case of Call of Duty, there's just a myriad of reasons you could list to boycott Call of Duty in particular. And I feel like increasingly, as more people are less willing to play Call of Duties, the audience for Call of Duties is just becoming its own separate niche of, these are people that probably work very hard and only have a few hours a week to play video games, and they're just used to playing Call of Duty, so they're still just playing Call of Duty. They probably never go into the store or don't care if they spend $80 because they're not they have more money than time at this point. And that's very much just going to be a different class of gamers than your average gamer who's shopping at Steam sales and trying to get as much hours of gameplay per dollar as possible. And just what an average gamer is. The average is getting wider, and the player base of people who play video games is getting wider. And so we are very much not a unified single type of person. We're gamers, more than most classes of fandoms, is extremely diverse and getting more diverse all the time, as far as age and income and gender even, and just religions and where they come from, regions, pretty much every aspect. Anyways, moving on. Microsoft has undone the undoing of the Blizzard NetEase partnership And so Microsoft has effectively renewed Blizzard and NetEase partnership to bring key titles back to China. The two megacorps have rekindled the relationship following a high-profile split in 2022, which this will more than likely do nothing for Blizzard outside of China, but it will make Microsoft some money and Blizzard look more profitable on the books, at least. It is unlikely, in my opinion, that you'll see a lot of Chinese players coming back to playing via NetEase, Hearthstone, or Overwatch, or World of Warcraft, or Diablo, or any other Blizzard game, because I'd imagine a lot of Chinese people would have gotten the message that they shouldn't support any Blizzard games or play any Blizzard games because that's an awful American company that tried to betray NetEase. I'm sure NetEase certainly is going to win in that competition of popularity, and so I wouldn't be surprised if this turns out to be a particularly poor deal for Microsoft, and Microsoft probably already knows that but doesn't really care. And they are probably doing more to just buy influence in China than they are to actually make money in China. Remember, China still very much doesn't want any of its citizens to play games, and instead wants them all to just be constantly working. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see if this changes anything at all, or if NetEase brings back new statues in front of their company of Warcraft characters or Blizzard characters, only to potentially smash those statues again. And in fairness, yes, they very publicly put out pictures of smashing the statues, but in reality, if you're going to get rid of a giant statue you've built, you have two opportunities. Either you pay through the nose to have it lifted up by a crane and put on a flatbed and put into some storage facility where it will become a museum piece, or you take it to a flatbed and put it somewhere else where it can be displayed, or you do the cheap option of smashing it into pieces. That's true for basically any statue available. You pay through the nose to try and not break it in transport, or you just admit that it's going to be destroyed. It's actually a little surprising we don't have more museums that are collecting statues. We have ancient Greek statues, certainly, in museums, but just an average advertisement statue or piece of art statue around the world is either going to be left up or it's going to be allowed to be destroyed. And then the good news on that is most statues are designed to stay around for a very long time, and so they can just keep it where it is, usually exposed to the weather. Anyways, that's getting off topic, and I really don't have a lot of extra time today, so I need to kind of hurry here. Disney Speedstorm's next season pass can only be purchased with real money, not the earned in-game money, which I think we talked about this in the last stream, but that sure seems crappy, for lack of a better term. Yep. It's a shame that Disney Speedstorm has just been so poorly marketed and poorly released, because on the face of it, a Mario Kart clone on PC that has Disney characters should be a easy success, and it's just not happening because they're trying to make too much money and they're just not advertising it well enough. I wanted to point this out, that with the Fallout TV series, I have seen a significant increase in cosplayers doing pretty easy cosplay. It's pretty easy to make a latex jumpsuit with that, which noticeably that is not something that really happened that much around Fallout 4. So I wouldn't be surprised if we get some news that the Fallout Amazon Prime TV series gets way more viewers than the number of people who bought Fallout 4. That being said, the number of people who bought Fallout 4 would have paid $60 or $70 per person for that game, whereas the number of people who will watch the Amazon Prime TV series are paying maybe $150 a year to have all of Prime Video and all of the other Amazon Prime benefits, including Prime Gaming and Twitch things and all of that. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, and it won't even be an apples to apples comparison even if you could make that comparison, because they're putting the first episode of the Fallout TV series for free on Twitch, and so the bigger number they're going to advertise first is going to be that a massive number of people watched the Fallout episode 1. If Amazon cannot make that claim that it is one of the most viewed videos on Twitch ever, then Fallout is going to have failed miserably. Or if they can't say that the combined views from Amazon Prime and Twitch isn't super high. So we saw that, I think they were EA games, had been listed onto Steam out of the blue, old EA games, like the Red Alert series. Now we're seeing EA Play subscription price going up, which those two stories may be completely disconnected, but to me it does seem to indicate that EA is seeking out ways to make more money. Then you combine it with the rumors that they are potentially slowing down the development of Dead Space 2. I wouldn't be surprised if EA is struggling for cash. If you look here at the games in this image, let's just magnify this. Yeah, Battlefield 2024, Jedi Fallen Order, The Sims, which is a really old game, UFC Fight Club, NHL 23, an old game in It Takes Two, Football Club 2024, Madden 2024, F1 2023, it looks like, Apex Legends, Need for Speed Unbound, Super Mega Baseball 4, never even heard of that one. Then you have the Dead Space remake taking up 2 spaces, Dragon Age Inquisition, Mass Effect. Is this supposed to be Andromeda, or is this a Mass Effect remaster? And then Wild Hearts, which I don't even remember that game. So if I just go through this, the games that seem relevant are the Dead Space remake, which is only slightly relevant. Maybe Apex Legends is still being played. Battlefield is still being played. Sims is an old game, but it's still being played. And Fallen Order maybe is still being played. And then the rest of these are sports games, and your mileage is probably going to vary just on those sports games. They definitely don't feel like they have a lot of tentpole games. And noticeably, if they had just 3 more games to their name to mention, they wouldn't have stretched out these games to take up the extra space. Well, I guess that would have been 4 games. Yeah. EA really, in recent history, has never felt like it was making games as much as it was making ways to take money out of your pocket. It may finally be the case that there's just fewer people who really want to play sports games or who are willing to continuously purchase new yearly releases of sports games that are just incremental improvements at best, or old games, which EA only has so many old games they can lean on. And Star Wars itself is a unique situation where it's hard to maintain fandom around Star Wars when there's just too much bad Star Wars getting released in TV and movies. Star Wars itself is kind of in this weird heyday situation where the best time to be a Star Wars fan would have been maybe 2 or 3 years after episode 6 came out. The first original trilogy, 3, 4, and 5. Yeah, that's what I mean. It was episode 5. Empire Strikes Back, I think, is the one. Yeah. Before you had Attack of the Clones being announced. But past the point where you were expecting really to ever see a sequel around Star Wars. That would have been the heyday to be a Star Wars fan, because it's mostly just nostalgia that at that point, or fan novels or video games based on the original games, without running into the major complaints that started to happen after 1, 2, and 3, and then the completely different major complaints around 6, 7, and 9. 7, 8, 6, 7, and 8. 7, 8, 9, yeah. Moving on, Treyarch Studios is hiring. Figured I would just mention that if you want to check out their Twitter feed. GameDeveloper.com has an article here, what the game industry must do to prevent occupational burnout. This might be an interesting read if you are interested in running a game company or working at a game company. It probably is helpful information if it's good information, which is a big if. For any industry. But yeah, burnout is a real problem and is often seemingly the goal of a lot of companies, is to just burn out employees so that they'll die before they end up having to give them a raise or paying for retirement. Let's see. The Halo and Destiny veteran Chris O'Dowd has joined Probably Monsters to lead the new studio, or to lead a new studio. The company also has hired a new chief product officer. I assume Probably Monsters is the maker of the RPG games, Sometimes Always Monsters, or its sequel I think was Always Sometimes Monsters. Maybe those are backwards, but maybe not. Interestingly, the new chief product officer is Adam Reimer, who was a veteran media and entertainment executive who worked at Legendary Digital Networks, and he was guiding the development of the Nerdist channels and the Geek and Sundry channels, both of which pretended like they were YouTube channels being run by celebrities and were way more independent than they really were. And all of those celebrities have since left Nerdist and Geek and Sundry, and Nerdist and Geek and Sundry changed drastically into being uninteresting, also ran nerd geek channels. Geek and Sundry in particular was, I believe, doing Kickstarters to fund the development of their videos while secretly being run by a production company. Nerdist. Yeah. Both Nerdist and Geek and Sundry heavily made content around the big celebrities that they had, and all of them have no part in them anymore at all. And noticeably, I would say Nerdist and Geek and Sundry highlight where they were late to the party, and so that, unlike Giant Bomb, there just wasn't ever enough of a fandom around them to keep them to be relevant. Rooster Teeth is kind of a contrasting example of that, where Rooster Teeth has recently been shut down, but they did have a very passionate fan base that kept them around more than they probably deserved. This Probably Monsters logo is some eyes, a frowny face with some fangs, and some horns, but if you squint well enough, it to me looks like you've got a lady here with a belt, like a furry thong here, and like you would just really have to draw a line here. Otherwise this does kind of look like this is a furry thong, and then this is the torso, and that this would be the background the horns would be. And that's probably intentional. It's probably definitely intentional to just have the outline of a female form and sex selling. Although we really haven't seen logos do that too much in video games. Hidden Grove, in comparison, has a shape that barely forms the top half of a G, and that's it. I mean, that's a really poor logo, because if I saw this, I would just assume this is some kind of squiggle. Although in fairness, if you didn't put probably monsters here, again, I would just think this is a lady. I imagine somebody intentionally drew it that way, whether they were told to draw it that way or not. Artists and logo designers tend to like to have fun that way. We had already talked about this. Dead Space 2 remake reportedly being shelved. I imagine there's ways EA could say that the story is false, in the fact that maybe Motive is not working on an Iron Man or Battlefield game, but we've also seen video game companies just straight up lie and say something is false, and then a week later confirm that it actually was totally true. Let's see, this is a rumor coming from Jeff Grubb, which Jeff Grubb to me seems to be very fast and loose with confirming rumors or being accurate in his reporting, so I wouldn't be surprised one bit if this is a 100% false rumor. The problem with the new Giant Bomb hiring Jeff Grubb and making him have his own show just around rumors is then there's just this need to have rumors in an industry where there isn't always rumors happening. Unlike the way a news desk used to work, in that you would have somebody potentially working a news desk and working on a story for months, weeks, maybe even years, and maybe that story would get killed and maybe it wouldn't, but you would never really have the person working the rumor desk have to get on the camera and talk about a rumor once a week. That is where all of those people in the background of a lot of those newsroom 24-hour news channels are supposed to be doing, is that they'd be working on stories to see if it turns out to be true, to see if it's interesting enough to actually make it to air. And you often have a producer in something like CNN that determines in an early morning meeting what is going to be reported on and what isn't, and inherently that means that producer, or editor is usually what it's called, has way too much control as far as what it gets reported and what doesn't, or how it gets reported. And usually the editor is being severely controlled by the owners of a news station or newspaper, and it's always been that way. Newspapers have always been very much run by rich people to benefit rich people. There's no public funding in running a newspaper. Maybe there should be. But if there was public funding in running a newspaper, I also would wonder if it wouldn't just become government propaganda 100% of the time. Anyways, I can't really go any further towards this rumor, but I didn't really even expect the Dead Space 2 remake to come very quickly. And they might as well not rush it out. It's not like they have an idea for Dead Space 4 that they're super excited about, I'm sure. So they can take their time and think about how they're going to redo Dead Space 3 and how they're going to lead into a Dead Space 4. And they are within some unique constraints to make a Dead Space game actually work as a Dead Space game. They can't do like the Wii on rails shooter Dead Space game that nobody really remembers, and they can't do a multiplayer game. They could probably do an asynchronous 4 versus 1 multiplayer game in the Dead Space universe, that probably would work. But the main games in the series have to be part action, part horror, competing against Resident Evil, and always probably going to be second to Resident Evil. They probably should steal some ideas from Resident Evil while they're at it. This isn't video game related, but I've been following this new comic company called Distillery, DSTLRY, and it's been a 1-year anniversary, and they're having a signings. That being said, the bigger story, I think, is that there really has not been anything super impactful from Distillery. I kind of hoped, but within reason, didn't really expect it to happen, that this would have been the beginnings of a new competition to corporate-owned Marvel and DC, but I'm really not seeing it. The problem there is you just gotta churn out a wide variety of comics and a large amount of comics, and they didn't do much of a variety, and they really just didn't do enough comics in general for it to begin to work that way. Eventually it might become a thing if you became a huge fan of the 2 or 3 comics they're releasing, but they needed to really flood the market with closer to 20 comics. Yeah, ideally you would have wanted 20 comics that hit really well and sold very well, compared to as many as 52 comics coming out of Marvel and DC each month for it to really have an impact. YouTube is adding new shopping features that you can advertise products and bulk tag products into your descriptions if you're making YouTube videos. I would hope that there's some thought here that this would make YouTube a little bit better in the long run, but I wouldn't really hold my breath around that either. At a certain level, if we could get shopping instead of ads, maybe we would see less ads, but probably not. We'd probably see the same amount of ads and just more shopping. More money into content creators' hands is nice, but it definitely comes at the expense of the viewers seeing more ads or shopping more. But yeah, as a content creator, the best you can do is use the shopping features responsibly. Don't just make videos trying to lie and sell products that are garbage. Try to be real critical about the products you're reviewing and recommending, and make your word mean something, and try and promote things that you think people will benefit from. I see it in the smart home devices in particular. You'll see a lot of people who are getting free review units of smart devices, and then they mostly just sing the praises of those smart devices and don't say anything critical about it, and then they just have an affiliate link to those smart devices. Which, yeah, if your channel is nothing but a commercial, then your channel is going to have very little value to your viewers for the most part. That Russian hacker YouTube channel, where he would just get a bunch of everyday carry gadgets and other kinds of gadgets, is one of the worst examples of that, where he loves everything and he says, "Oh, that's so awesome." I haven't seen his channel around in a while, so I don't know if he's still doing that, but he would occasionally show an interesting gadget, but then he wouldn't really review the gadget or try it out, and then he would just say everything is awesome. I'm not sure he's ever said a single product is bad, maybe every now and then. He's probably missing because he has Russian in the name. He probably was downvoted in the algorithm because of that alone. Anyways, Bungie is apparently teasing what's beyond Destiny 2 amid a Destiny 3 speculation, which is ironic since Destiny 1 was supposed to be a game forever that never got a sequel, so now we're talking a Destiny trilogy. The thing that strikes me from an outsider looking in and having never really any interest in playing Destiny and never touching it or really paying any attention to it is it just definitely doesn't feel like they added any level of content or quality to its content that would bring me in to play a third game. I wouldn't expect the third game to be accessible to new players. So it definitely feels like Destiny 3 would be very much like a Diablo 3, where it's just, and unless they are just going to do a full-on reboot for new players, even then I still don't see anything interesting. Like, I can't really tell you the story of Destiny, which is weird. I know that there's a moon object that maybe isn't even a moon anymore, and I know you run around and shoot things. And that's the literal totality of what I know about Destiny. And I should know more. They should advertise it better, certainly. Let's see. We already talked about this, Microsoft entering an agreement to explore bringing new NetEase games to Xbox. So this seems like this is a tit-for-tat agreement. Where maybe Microsoft is more interested in bringing NetEase games to the rest of the world than they are interested in Blizzard having games in China. Riven is having a big push again. The remake of Riven. So they have here like Tinselman, Robin Miller, Cyan's co-founder and composer of the original Riven soundtrack, says creating new music for the Riven remake. Robin Miller, I believe, is the brother of Rand Miller, I believe, is the guy still kind of in charge of Cyan. I think he just kind of stopped really being involved with Cyan as much in their downtime when they weren't making that much stuff. And then they have a short video here, conversations with the creative team behind Riven. And then here's a brand new music track. And then of course they were making a meme about the eclipse, which it doesn't even make that much sense because you don't see an eclipse or a moon in this scene in the actual game. So yeah, they're continuing to push the Riven remake. I will almost certainly play the Riven remake. There is a subtitle here now. I'm seeing New Discoveries from the Lost Deny Empire is a subtitle, so that does imply to me that we may see more content than what was in the original Riven game, which is what's going to really be the sales point there. Is I really don't need to play Riven yet again if it's just going to have one small room that you can look around and nothing else. But if they're making new music, then that does imply to me that there might be a lot more. And ideally, I'd like to see Riven either go in a completely different direction or be set in a completely different timeline than the original game, or a different alternate universe than the original game. This is their last chance Cyan has, basically, to try and reboot in a alternate universe style of the Myst series before they are going to have to start to make the Ubisoft games like Myst 3 Exile, which they probably don't want to go in that direction and just remake those games because they didn't really make those games in the first place and they're not as well beloved. And if they don't really do anything to potentially make a new game, a new sequel, a different mystery, then they're stuck in this spot where they just kind of have to sit around and do nothing or make a new game that they failed at making new games to getting those to sell until there's enough time to justify making yet another remake of Mr. Ribbon, which they've been very good about timing that out and making remakes and reselling remakes, but they just can't go on forever doing this. The new team of younger developers want to actually make games, and so you'd probably see Cyan lay off a bunch of people if this game sells poorly. But in fact, you might see Cyan lay off a bunch of people as soon as this game gets out the door, just to save money. Yeah, I already talked about Never Alone 2. Let's see, we could look at the screenshots and see if anything looks amazingly different here. Not really. Looks pretty much still the same as Never Alone 1 did. The animation style and the platforming of Never Alone 1 could have used some polish. That's another issue. Certainly it played and looked like a mobile game when really I don't think it ever was released on mobile. Pocket Pair has teased a Palworld Arena player versus player mode. You can see what definitely looks like a Pokemon Arena style lineup, which, yeah, one has to hope though that they actually get that content out quickly. Otherwise, there won't be enough of people who care to go back to Palworld to even give it a chance. If anything, Palworld's legacy seems increasingly likely to be just the fact that they've proven that Nintendo can't or won't sue people for making parody games that have monsters in it, as long as the monsters don't have the exact same name or the exact same appearance of a Pokemon. And in fairness, even if you were to try and make a Pokemon that looked very similar to like a Pikachu, well, Pikachu is designed around a field mouse, so any aspects that were built around a field mouse would be very difficult to claim copyright on. You could try and say a field mouse that's yellow that has a lightning tail, a lightning bolt shaped tail is the copyrightable elements, but then you really get down to a question about, is that enough to really be that creative? Because the lightning bolt itself symbol is almost certainly public domain. A field mouse is something created by nature, so it's not copyrightable. And the color yellow is something created by nature. So, yeah, Pikachu is about the closest thing that is unique there. And noticeably, this guy is not called Pikachu, and he's much bigger than a Pikachu would look, and he has different color palettes, very different distinguishable characters. And inherently, I imagine Pokemon would have had to have thought at some point that if they can churn out 150 Pokemon in the first generation of Pokemon games, clearly somebody else could churn out a different 150 Pokemon-like creatures to compete with that. And Digimon had already been doing that. Yep. Noticeably, Pokemon Company has never tried to sue or complain about Digimon characters either. If anything, the fandom probably complains more than the companies do. Anyways, moving on. GameDeveloper.com says the Ascend Studios has reportedly furlonged the majority of its staff. The Immortals of Avium Studios allegedly let go nearly 30 of its staff that remained after its layoffs in August of 2023. This definitely feels like this was a game that didn't deserve to fail as much as it did, but in particular I think the problem is that the publisher just didn't advertise it well enough. And increasingly, we could probably make a long list of games that where the publisher underfunds the advertisement and just promotes it poorly when there is a good game behind it. Certainly the opposite is often true too, where something gets over-published and over-promoted and turns out to be a garbage game. But yeah, with the increased amount of games that are getting released and the increased competition, putting games in front of the right people who actually want to play those games is going to become increasingly difficult. And that's something where a storefront like Steam has to always be on the ball and improve upon. Steam's front page in particular and its recommendations, not particularly great as far as highlighting games people might be interested in playing. We talked about this, the Rogue Prince of Persia PC game, somewhat. Yeah, this is a very weird art style because it's almost CGA in the color palette. CGA being a old computer standard where the pinks were much more pink than they should have been. But the problem in particular with the CGA color palette style is that CGA actually looked really good when you hooked it up to a old school tube TV. It got the color palette on that NTSC or PAL signal pretty downright perfect. It just looks terrible when you put it at a computer monitor setup because the color palette and the color responsive ratio on the computer palettes, computer monitors, particularly back then, were just significantly different. So the CGA style in the pink was not something you were ever actually supposed to see. So, yeah, it feels weird. This feels very cartoony, and I question what the roguelite or roguelike element here is really going to add to a game that is probably going to delight in causing you to die or take damage quite often. I half wonder if this isn't a game that was in parallel development with the other Prince of Persia game that recently was released, and that maybe this game was even supposed to be a free giveaway or demo of the previous game, because they both look fairly similar in their gameplay styles, just quickly going over those screenshots. And as for all I know, this character may actually be in the most recent Prince of Persia game, and this may be a spin-off directly from it. Here we have the Vampire Survivors DLC featuring the Contra characters with guns, which seems weird. Is this always the main protagonist of Vampire Survivors? A lady with a whip? I don't even know. Like, I see a lot of clones of Vampire Survivors, but I really haven't even played or seen Vampire Survivors itself. And then, yeah, this mouse definitely looks interesting. As far as you have half Popeye, half Mickey Mouse influences here. I wouldn't be surprised, though, if this isn't actually a game. We've already seen a few people make screenshots or make low-effort asset flip games like this. And, yeah. Wouldn't be surprised if there's not an actual experience here. But they put out a press release. They were part of the AAA indie effort that strikes me as something that really should yeah, it strikes me as something that they're actually working on and gonna do something with. I guess the question I'm most interested in here is whether this is a multiplayer game or not. And yeah, I guess I should have also said that the audio wasn't going to play there. I never play the audio. I should probably warn people about that. Yeah, that looks more like a game than some of the other ones I've seen. I guess it's probably a single player game. But it still definitely feels like it's just going to be more of a meme than something you would really want to play, just because of the black and whiteness to it. Like, I think a lot of people still would be turned off by the black and white nature of it, and if it was colorized, it'd probably sell a little bit better. You'll probably see some streamers playing this game every now and then, but that's about it. And it probably will sell better than a different game where you were running and gunning and swinging via ropes and kicking people. Let's see. Now, Machine Games, which is still working on this Indiana Jones things, put out this video, Happy National Siblings Day, promoting the two daughters of, not Duke Nukem, BJ Blazkowicz. Yeah. In their failed spin-off games that weren't very well received and weren't very interesting. You can see they're both wearing these regenerative armor artifact suits that they crammed into the story and didn't feel like it made a lot of sense in the Wolfenstein reboots. And yeah, there was definitely major controversies and lack of interest in making Wolfenstein spin-off games based off of characters we'd never seen or heard of before. There was certainly a lot of argument on both sides that it was like, oh, Machine Games has gone woke and turned BJ Blazkowicz a standard of masculinity and perhaps toxic masculinity into two female sisters. And then there's also been some arguments that Machine Games was just trying to cram down a completely different game down the throats of Wolfenstein fans who weren't buying it, and then Machine Games was complaining about that. Particularly these spin-off games didn't even play the same way as the Wolfenstein remakes. We have not heard any news around the final Wolfenstein game, and there's always been this question as far as, is Hitler going to show up in that third final Wolfenstein game, and if he does, will that be a controversy, or will it be a controversy if he doesn't show up? And I think there's probably a high lack of interest in Machine Games doing another Wolfenstein game. Now, I think in part because they're owned by Microsoft. I think they're owned by Microsoft. But yeah, they seem to be less interested in finishing that trilogy. Which, yeah. Maybe the Wolfenstein reboot would have been a probably great example of games that should have started to establish the idea of, we're not going to have trilogies anymore, we're just going to have two games, and then we're going to go quiet for a while and then reboot the series with another two games. There's nothing magical about the number 3, and increasingly having 3 games and having a trilogy just means the third game is going to suck. But yeah, I would like to see the Wolfenstein series as it is, the reboot series, wrap up. And we'll see about the Indiana Jones game as far as how actual incredibly fun that is. I can't even name these two characters. Part of the problem is introducing two new characters is an issue. According to GameDeveloper.com, IO Interactive is recruiting a Ubisoft alum Rodrigo Santoro for a James Bond project. Santoro previously worked on the immersive Sims-like game Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora and the Crysis sequels and the first two Division games. We've heard some early talks, a lot of early talks around this James Bond game. It's been a while though, as far as them actually having anything to show. They haven't shown anything, and it might very well just be very early in development, and it might very well have been rebooted 2 or 3 times at this point. So yeah, I talked about earlier the OBS NDI. As far as you can install this on non-lockdown operating systems, but immutable is the word. Operating systems makes it incredibly difficult because you have to also install the NDI runtime, and it just doesn't. It does on the OBS side make that somewhat clear as long as you scroll down and read, but it doesn't make that clear on the Flatpak version of OBS NDI. The NewTek NDI integration software is proprietary. It is clearly the right way you would do it if you were, say, connecting multiple cameras around a football stadium or something. It lets you stream in and out, and it lets you use a filter to get the audio of cameras and put it on other video sources with a filter. So they've kind of thought of 3 good uses in which you could use NDI. Although I question certainly the actual number of cameras you could have going streaming over a network. It probably is as good as it's going to get, but in a professional setting like a football stadium, I suspect they probably have $1 million of equipment that are sending video via hardwired connections, like USB to Ethernet, and then via Ethernet back to USB into some kind of server that is ingesting all of the camera feeds, or maybe even fiber optic to a server and not even converting USB at that point. It used to be Firewire, that was the thing you would use to connect a camera to a computer for higher speeds, because video in particular is the thing that requires a lot more speeds. But yeah, I don't think Firewire standard is still being used. And yeah, it might really be a case now that if you have gigabit in Ethernet, you could just on cameras connect gigabit Ethernet plugs into the back of them and connect everything around that way. You probably would want separate networks for the most part, one especially just for all the cameras going to an NDI source. NDI in particular seems to be supported by the big manufacturers of expensive cameras like Sony and such, so it probably is the standard. Anyways, I also talked about the Steam Link app, which is weird because to get the app, and only Valve would allow Valve to do this, which, yeah, manufacturer Valve. It literally just has links here to the Windows, Mac OS, Linux, iPad, Android TV, phones, Raspberry Pi, MetaQuest 2 and 3 and Pro. Weirdly, no link for the Raspberry Pi 5. It probably still would work. And it's designed in 2 ways. One, that you would just stream your game content to a screen, which I think is probably the best way to use it. Or the other way is to have, say, a cell phone and connect to your home computer, probably on your local area network. I don't think you're going to do well if you VPN'd into your home from a distant over the internet spot to do it, and I don't think it works through the internet anyways. But yeah. Well, apparently it does, because it says use 5G, and there's just no way you'd go through 5G as far as a connection. It says VR content may only be streamed over a local network. But yeah. There's not a lot of scenarios, though, where your main computer would be idle and you would just want to play it on your cell phone. Maybe sitting on a toilet or something is about the one thought there. And it's just not the best setup. And you can see there's a real focus here around the MetaQuest and VR, and that would have been about the time that they worked on this. Weirdly, apparently they sold this game for $1 at one point, but they changed their minds and just made it free, which makes a lot of sense. I would not have spent an extra $1 on the Steam Link to even experiment with it to make sure it worked. But yeah, this is really the only way on a Steam Deck to stream video to a computer, is through Steam's own thing. It's nice that they have that set up. It's weird that Steam Link is not really promoted or shown to new Steam Deck users. There really should be like a tutorial in gaming mode to say, hey, if you want to stream this to your computer, if you want to broadcast yourself that way, you can do it that way. Steam has its own broadcasting system where you could broadcast video of your gameplay to your Steam profile page. I don't think anybody actually does that or would see it, because it's not like broadcasts go anywhere or get promoted like YouTube promotes videos. It would make a lot of sense for them to just integrate Steam Link into the broadcast button, have a broadcast button that's more dedicated, and let you stream either directly to Twitch or YouTube to start with, possibly even Facebook, and possibly even Twitter if Twitter becomes a streaming service, possibly Kick even, and then streaming to other devices that can run an app. Now, noticeably here, what you can't do is, while you can do a Chromecast running an Android app or an Android TV running an Android app, you can't just hit a cast button and cast specifically using Chromecast functions. You've got to run the app and launch the app and set everything up. So it's not just as instantaneous as hitting a button and going on one side. It's going to be, you've got to probably bring up the Chromecast on your phone, on your TV, launch the Steam Link app. So more of a hassle than it should be. And weirdly, all I can do with that app is put it on my wish list to kind of remind myself it exists, because I can't mark that I actually own it. Alright, so let's go through all the games that I'm going to make YouTube shorts on here and curate that feed. My computer, weirdly, reset itself to do a Windows update in the middle of the night, and I've been sleeping in weird times, so I definitely found it strange that to wake up and see my computer's rebooting. See, this looks like this is a lo-fi and chill clone of a game, but it also seems like it might just be a life simulator, in that there's collectibles and costumes and things like that. I almost wonder if this is a cross promotion of a different game called Spirit Cities. But yeah, I'm still getting a decent amount of people commenting on my YouTube shorts and a decent amount of views on that Mutant Boxing League. I feel like there was a game like this before, but this is in VR. So maybe this is a new version. Just try and go through all these fairly quickly. Then we'll do headlines and then I'll be done. I'm running late here. Thought I might have run a little bit late today, but no, obviously I'm running later than I'd like to. What else? What else? What else? It's definitely a case, as far as the Steam Deck is concerned, that I'm not likely going to use it to play games just as an option by default. That I'd only play games on the Steam Deck to make footage, in particular to make footage, if the game did not run well on my computer. Otherwise it just makes all the sense in the world to not add all that extra overhead of streaming things via Steam Link and having apps open in networks, or even having the HDMI to USB-C cord and an HDMI capture card. Now, in that last scenario, had I a really strong gaming PC and then a pretty decent streaming recording box, having an HDMI connection in that case and a capture card does make some sense. But while the Steam Deck is pretty powerful as a portable device, it is not anywhere comparable to what a gaming PC can do, even a few years old. This Fractals of Destiny obviously looks like it's trying to seem like it's going to have some lewd imagery here. Unfortunately, it's not getting reviewed particularly well. I wonder if we start to see a few games that look a lot like Stellar Blade. Let's see. Needs work, attack speed, needs a left menu, needs to open faster, journal, needs to open faster, camera needs to be positioned further away from the player character. Yeah. So lack of polish here. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, particularly if Stellar Blade succeeds, that we'll start to see a lot of games, particularly on Steam, that have characters in skin-tight outfits and more lewd outfits, which is what I would like to see happen, but I'd also like to see the games being good. Inherently, if a bunch of Stellar Blade clones come out, like many other games get clones, and they're just all terrible, it will give a lot of ammunition to people who are anti-lewd games to say, well, lewd games are all garbage except for Stellar Blade, which they could argue is going to be the exception that proves the rule. And Stellar Blade has that unique spot and positioning in that the people in charge of making Stellar Blade Shift Up seem to really have a passion on making good looking characters and hopefully good games. Somewhat good games at least. They're not in it just to make a few cheap bucks and leave. At a certain level, Shift Up is the only Korean video game company I can name off the top of my head. So weirdly, Shift Up might just become the de facto biggest video game company in Korea, and the way Korean business is run, that could make them very, very big if need be. Samsung probably does have a gaming division, but I don't think they are making or publishing anything outside of Korea. Samsung is notably the huge corporation that is so big it really threatens the democracy of South Korea, in that if Samsung inherently wanted to cripple the South Korean government, they could probably do it. They're too big of a company with too many fingers and too many pies. I'm going to give this fighting game a chance, even though it probably is nothing. Ideally, what I'd like to see is Stellar Blade succeeding pretty well to put any doubters to silence, and then that opening the door that you have more regular games willing to have the occasional outfit that's lewd, going just a third of the directions towards a game like Stellar Blade. Not going super lewd, but being willing to show a little bit more cleavage, show more of a variety of forms and factors. This Master of VTuber game, for instance. Here's a question. But these are the kinds of games that have always been around here and aren't really being affected by Stellar Blade. I'd like to see more Western animators being willing to show a little bit more mature content and have more diversity than just having everything be anime style. As much as I may like anime style looking waifus, it wouldn't hurt to occasionally have some other styles of adult content. Here's yet another learn Japanese game. Actually, this one doesn't look too terrible, so I'm going to give it a chance. Don't think I'm giving this one a chance, though. Even with this III initiative announcement, it still is very, very slow as far as announcements for new games. We're gonna see 3 more shoot 'em ups in a row here, because I know this is all the same company, sort of flooding the Steam market, but really they're releasing this as a 4-pack, so you can't really complain that they released 4 games at the same time, intentionally trying to sell it cheaper as a 4-pack. Definitely like to see these only up clones go away. If anything, I think this probably, the vast amount of only up clones has proven that there's not as much of a... This one I almost would have given a chance, but it's not being received well. It's a VR game. Let's see. Good ideas, wonky realization. I lost my train of thought there, whatever I was talking about. Yeah. It's just not getting a lot of releases or announcements right now. And I don't know if there's really a lot of hope in the future. It may very well be a case that we'll get some Gears of War announcements and teases to games that are going to be coming out in a year or 2 or 3 or 4. But as far as releases and announcements for games that will be released in the rest of 2024, we may have a fairly small amount. Which, yeah, a new study said that for last year, the vast majority of people were playing games that were 6 years or older, so maybe this is just the reset that needs to happen. This game, comes up every now and then, and this looks fairly nicely animated. I'm not sure they're 100% sure how you actually played this game originally, but they've made a general good, decent way to play it. It's not much of a game, but it is also one of the oldest games ever to have been found. History stretching over 5 millennia. Let's see, this looks like garbage. I do have a list here. Did my fall list cleanup actually work for once? I don't think so. No, this came out April 8th. No, it just moved that for some reason. Maybe I accidentally drug it around. Else through the Fey realm. Probably nothing, but it's an interesting idea. Increasingly, I think there needs to be a new Disney type company that is willing to do something more, probably make video games around the public domain stories like Alice in the Wonderland. That being said, Disney has some deep pockets, although now would probably be the best time, if ever, to just start to try to make games like that. But we also haven't seen anything based off like Winnie the Pooh yet, and there was way more enthusiasm around making Mickey Mouse parody games. Once Mickey Mouse went into public domain, the Steamboat Willie version of Mickey Mouse went into public domain, then there was Winnie the Pooh. Alright, well, here's the SteamDB website, and let's see if anything looks particularly different here. Destiny 2 still getting a large amount of sales here in the 10th place, 134,000 24-hour peak, with its all-time peak only being 316,000 players. So, yeah. Power World is under 100,000 in the 15th spot. Yeah, if you look at the top 10 spots and you're at about 100,000, it does kind of tell you that as far as the 24-hour peak of yesterday, there really was only 2 or 3 million people in total playing the top 10 games, with probably a lot of them being bots in Counter-Strike 2. That being said, that is if you only look at the top 10. When you start to realize that there's thousands upon thousands of games on Steam, and a large majority of them are single player, so there's just no reason that there would be more than even 1,000 people playing a game at any one point, any 24-hour period. The number of total players that are playing on Steam at any time is a number that only Valve would really know, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're talking 100 million to 700 or 800 million in any random 24-hour peak of players. Now, there's roughly 7 billion people on the planet. Obviously, it's not going to be half of that or a quarter of that that all played video games in a day, but it could be an eighth or a 16th of that. Certainly, that 1 out of every 16 people plays on average a game on Steam in a 24-hour period. Yeah, those numbers aren't crazy. My chart messed up again, and I've never gone back and fixed any of this. I say it every time. You can see Apex Legends is up, Arca Blade Point is up, Helldivers 2 is up a little bit. There's a lot of talk around Helldivers 2, but the fandom is kind of valleyed out at a low. Power World is back down after a little bit of a bump, just up and down, up and down. it definitely doesn't seem like people are playing the particularly highest top tier or most played games much more than average these days. And that makes a lot of sense. There's really no reason to be super enthusiastic around Apex Legends when it's been out for a while and there's really just nothing new to say. Here we can see the III initiative on Steam's front page. So, yeah. Let's see if there's any games that they didn't really mention. Streets of Rogue 2, Norland, Wizard of Legend. Yeah, some of these definitely were not mentioned there by Gamatsu. So Gamatsu has some catching up to do, I think, as far as articles. May also be a case that some of these actually weren't shown at the III initiative and are being expanded here. Cat Quest 3 gives me an excuse to play Cat Quest 2 a little bit earlier, I suppose. Here you have equal footing for YouTube, Twitter /X, and III initiative. I probably should watch this video from on YouTube or whatever. I'm not going to watch it on X, obviously, just to see how much like a Summer Games Fest it really felt like, because inherently that's what this would be. This would be the collection of people who would have been showing their games off before Summer Games Fest went into its proper presentation and then showed off a bunch of AAA games, at which point most people would have forgotten all the indie games. Looks like we have Gearbox. Does that say Gearbox Publishing? Yes. Well, they've changed their name since this logo was made to Arc Publishing, I believe it was what they changed their name just a couple days ago too. And yeah, I guess that's probably all I have to say here. But it is nice that Steam is doing that for at least one page load. Seems like they've already taken it down. Here we have a mobile game called Countersight. I think I played this on my cell phone for a brief second and then couldn't get into it when I was looking for new games to play. Yeah, increasingly I do expect mobile games to also show up on PC day one. Yeah. But there is definitely a danger I want to avoid there too. I don't want to start playing just mobile games left and right on my channel, particularly since I won't be that interested in sticking with the mobile games. Here's recommendations of games that aren't Lego games that, because I've played Lego Marvel Heroes, this is one of those few custom recommendations, and yeah, none of these are really grabbing my attention because obviously the algorithm thinks Lego 2K Drive is connected to Lego Marvel Superheroes because it has Lego in the name when they're fairly different games, and then it is making a logical move and leap here to say that a racing game is connected because of 2K Drive. Although in fairness, it looks like they've just tagged this game as having Lego as a tag when it doesn't seem like there really is any Lego here. I think if Lego as a tag is allowed, yeah, apparently it is. You'd think that copyrighted terms should not be allowed to be a tag, because yeah, while there are some Lego games actually here, there is more than a few games here that are not Lego games. They do not have the registered trademark. You can see the little R there of Lego at the end. And inherently it's advertising to me the non-Lego games that I haven't purchased yet, because I already have purchased all the Lego games. Lego Brawls, is this out? I guess it is. I don't think it was received particularly well. Yeah, that's a decent attempt at the front page of trying to market something to me, whereas your discovery queue is not really trying to market anything to you as far as targeted advertisements. It's literally just trying to show you the newest of games and hope that you'll find something interesting, and then connecting me to games from publishers I've already bought games from puts you in this weird spot where you're just following Warner Brother games and they're saying getting Suicide Squad, or you playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, so you play Konami games, therefore Metal Gear Solid Remaster. What is this company even from? I don't even know what this logo is for either of those two, so that's not the greatest way to advertise things. And as far as the new and trending, which could be somewhat useful, it's not a ton here. This Children of the Sun, Botany Manor. Botany Manor catches my attention. It's something I'd like to play. Of course, I really can't afford to buy any games now. I bought a Steam Deck instead. So yeah, choices were made, and now I have to live with those choices. I have plenty of old games certainly to play, and not enough time. One second as I'm throwing a mug, an empty water mug, away. I'm tossing it away, I'm not throwing it in the trash. Let's do these headlines and then be done. The clips are still working. I still need to work on it so it is automated. Chapters I haven't looked at because I didn't automate that step. But yeah, I am making clips, and in making clips, it seems like that's helping the algorithm decide to promote my channel more. So I do seem like I'm getting more interactions and more comments in the chat and more people watching. Alright, headlines. Electronic Arts is raising the price of EA Play subscription. Dead Space 2 remake reportedly shelved following a lackluster sales of the first game. April's PlayStation Plus game catalog and classic titles have been confirmed. Let's see if any of those games are really interesting. The fact that Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmares is being added is a little weird. The original PlayStation version of a very old Alone in the Dark, which noticeably nobody has said anything or really reviewed the new Alone in the Dark, even though I think the game is out now. Maybe it hasn't quite been released, but I think it's out, and just people who are uninterested in even reviewing it. Increasingly, it feels like that is the case, that I just don't have any good sources of people actually trying to review games, and I have way too many sources of people trying to talk about video game culture and video game rumors and video game news. Like, the lack of consumer advice is definitely noticeable. Bungie teases what's beyond Destiny 2 amid Destiny 3 speculation. Microsoft enters an agreement to explore bringing new NetEase games to Xbox. It's an interesting situation that NetEase would be potentially even interested in bringing their games to the Xbox, considering how in most other Asian countries PlayStation probably is outselling Xbox significantly, but in China in particular, that their dislike of Sony as a Japanese company may be higher than their dislike of Xbox as a United States company. So they may pick Xbox as being the popular console to play games on. Although I would argue probably in China, PC gaming probably rules supreme, or some other kinds of... Yeah, it's probably PC gaming. The Final Fantasy VII Rebirth soundtrack featuring 175 tracks is out now. The $80 Call of Duty Kong glove is not worth it, claims fans. Sega is celebrating a fearless year of Shadow with a series of events. This is all working up to the Shadow third Sonic film, which stars Shadow the Hedgehog. Be interesting if the movie series really tried to shift focus to Shadow the Hedgehog. I don't know if the current fandom of Sonic fans would go with that or not. Like, it certainly didn't work when they first introduced Shadow, as Sonic's still around and still super popular. 20 classic SNK titles have been released on Good Old Games. This is they're having a sale around that. The list here are definitely a lot of old SNK games. That Samurai Showdown might be about the only one I really recognize. A lot of the games are somewhat generic. Super Sidekicks, Soccer Brawl. But yeah. I'm not sure if these games have come to Steam, or if they ever would come to Steam, or what state they currently are in as far as being really old games. Disney Speedstorm's next season pass can only be purchased with real money, not in-game earned currency. World of Warcraft Cataclysm Classic release date has been announced. People playing World of Warcraft a second time. I don't think the fans of World of Warcraft are going to be alive by the time they try to reboot and redo classic servers a third time. Yeah. Warcraft as a game series, it certainly has gone in a very different direction than what it was when you were playing the real-time strategy games Warcraft 1 and 2. And so if they were to make a Warcraft 3, which I'd like to see them try, I can't help but expect it to just be full of all kinds of new characters and races and abilities that have been evolved in World of Warcraft, instead of it really just being orcs versus humans in a real-time strategy game. Yep. It would be a tough game to develop, certainly. And if you tried to take all the content and ideas from the World of Warcraft MMO and put it into a Warcraft 3 real-time strategy, that would be a very complicated real-time strategy, I imagine. Anyways, moving on. Palworld players advised not to load multiplayer amid reports of Xbox saves being lost. It feels like this is either the second or third time that Palworld has been released in too buggy of a state to be acceptable. Like, we have seen a lot of stories of save corruption bugs in several games, and it does seem like Xbox and consoles QA is getting worse. Unsurprisingly, since they're laying off QA, and the QA is having to fight to unionize instead of just focus on their job. The physical version of Star Wars Outlaws requires an online connection to install. Oh, yep, we've had these controversies before, and Ubisoft has been crappy before in other ways, so yep, we need to just maintain the pressure and keep on complaining as best as we can. Yep, this Save Our Games movement is getting promoted somewhat well, as far as just contacting actual government bodies and filing complaints and making comments. But yeah, the talk about how unacceptable it is to have online connection just to install the game is kind of crazy and pretty unnecessary. Although in fairness, almost every game probably needs online connection these days because there's an immediate update to fix the bugginess. So this may very well just be Ubisoft admitting that games get released in such a broken state a lot of times that they need that day one patch to actually be the content of a playable game, which again gets back to certification just not doing their job as far as consoles in particular, as far as them letting unplayable buggy versions be pressed onto the discs just in the assumption that most people will update to a patched version. Mythic Entertainment Developments announced Airship Survival RPG Echoes of Elysium, which, yeah, sounds a lot like a pirate game to me, with just slightly different visuals. The pirate game concept seems to be super popular amongst developers. Doesn't look like this video is going to want to play, and yet it doesn't feel like to me that they have really figured out what the gameplay mechanics are supposed to be there. Now there are several other games with Elysium in the name, but yeah, that was the entirety of the teaser, was just seeing that ship in the clouds. That was nothing. Yeah. Elysium is just ancient Greek myth, though, so it's not surprising that there's several different games from different developers that have Elysium in the name. Star Wars Outlaws gets a new story trailer and release date as pre-orders go live. The open world game will be released in August. Do we have an actual date? August 30th. For the PS5, Xbox Series X and S, and PC. Interesting split here, no PS4 version. Mortal Kombat 1 Ermac dated with new gameplay trailer. Okay. So I guess they're still making content for Mortal Kombat 1. Not hearing any enthusiasm around it. Although, frankly, I think Mortal Kombat may just have enough momentum still that they can just continuously release games, release new characters now and then, and they'll keep their diminishing fan base around a little bit longer. I don't know what you could really do with Mortal Kombat other than just take a long break and let absence make the heart grow fonder for the game series. Unless you want to straight up do live action footage, which that would be the one thing that would cause controversy enough to get Mortal Kombat back into the reality, is if you could straight up do an animation style that was in no way cartoony and was just live action footage of actual actors fighting and being beheaded with obviously film tricks. Like, you can't make a snuff film and actually show people literally be beheaded, but yeah, if it was hyper realistic, that would cause enough of a controversy and be such a generational leap forward that visually that might catch people's attention. Edgelord people who would want to play a game that is live action violence, which I don't know if there's really a lot of desire for that, because the actual live action violence in movies is going down. There's a lot of people shooting guns, but there's a lot less gore where people are being shown being hit by a gun, so it's often cut in a way that you see and hear gunshots, but you're not even seeing where the bullets are landing or if they're even hitting people. You're just seeing people fall down. Yeah. You basically would be making a Saw-like movie if you made a live-action Mortal Kombat. And that might work, but it might not. It might make too much of a controversy, frankly. Moving on. Star Wars Outlaws release date leaked ahead of its trailer reveal. So, August 30th, we already know that. Helldivers 2's latest update fixes mission crashing bugs. This is the one game that people are talking about, at least on Reddit, which I know Reddit's not the real world, but it's my closest parallel is that there definitely seems to be a rabid fan base that is getting to the front page talking about Helldivers 2, and I would assume that's a lot of people playing Helldivers 2. So, yeah. But noticeably, Helldivers 2 is not in the #1 spot as far as the most played game in the past few weeks. Gearbox Publishing is now Arc Games. The publisher was not included in the Gearbox sale to Take-Two. Amazon's Fallout show has already been renewed for a second season. Which, yeah, seems like Amazon is definitely trying to be very good at announcing and producing and promoting the Fallout show. I kind of wish Has Been Hotel has been confirmed for a second season, and I kind of wish Invincible had been confirmed for a third season. And there's definitely several other shows on Amazon that I would like to have more confirmation that they're going to continue to make content for it. I imagine they probably will do everything, maybe not Has Been Hotel, but they really don't have that many other options. There is a danger, certainly, that they just go all in on Fallout, and then you see a whole bunch of Fallout content, and it just becomes Amazon Prime is the new AMC, in the sense that AMC was making a ton of Walking Dead, Amazon, the Walking Dead zombie shows and spin-offs, and the Talking Dead follow-up show, and I would hate to see Amazon Prime become like that, where it's just a one-trick pony. But, yeah. I also want to see them succeed in any way they can succeed, just so there's some competition to Netflix and Disney Plus. $70 games will go the way of the dodo, believes the Saber CEO. The former interim Embracer COO believes developers will move to reduce risks and costs, which I would hope that means the games are going to go down in price, and that this isn't a statement that it's going to go up in price, because you could say the exact same thing and it mean that the games are actually going to go higher. The Saber CEO may not have as much insight as you think, though, as far as just the video game pricing industry, since there's so many different companies making those decisions, and they're all greedy, so inherently they want to raise the price, and as soon as one company raises the price, the next company feels less pressure against raising the price. And traditionally in capitalistic systems, you don't see very many things go down in price once they go up. Maybe a little bit, but overall the trend is always higher and higher in devaluation of the dollar. And honestly, on an extremely long scale of thousands of years, I'm not sure any one currency has been around that long. It may just be a case that every capitalistic system increases by having deflation to a point, and at which the country, for one reason or another, falls apart and gets reformed as a new country, and then a new currency is established and everything gets reset. But yeah, I'm too late today to speculate on economics, so I'm going to move on. A photo of NetEase and Blizzard CEO sparks speculation of a China reunion. The update here being that Blizzard titles will be made available again in China. It's been confirmed. So, yeah. Seems like somebody has scratched out and censored out some faces here. But, yeah. This is a kind of great example of a rumor article from Video Games Chronicle that is just completely unactionable and not that helpful. Because, yeah, you have rumors and speculation that something's going to happen, and then a couple days later you get the confirmation. What did you benefit by having that information unconfirmed a couple days earlier? it's not even like in the game industry that there's any competition to buy games early. Maybe you could buy shares in stocks. Maybe you could have bought some shares of Microsoft if you believe this would give Microsoft's share price a bump, which it may very well not. So maybe you could influence the market by having some somewhat insider information here before something's announced. But as far as going to GameStop and buying a game, a Blizzard game is going to be the exact same price today as it was a week ago, as it will be a week from now. All games get released at the same time. Best you can hope for is just random seasonal sales, like a summer sale, which Steam still hasn't announced any date for a summer sale at all. So it's probably going to be pretty late summer, it feels like. Activision says it banned 27,000 Call of Duty accounts over the weekend. I talked about this in the last stream. Still don't feel like announcing and being proud of bannings is helpful to your company image or your game's image. And then the UK retailer Game is reportedly making layoffs while moving the rest of the staff to 0-hour contracts, or pressuring the rest of the staff to take 0-hour contracts. Okay, so that was the Video Games Chronicle articles. Let's now go through the Gematsu articles. So, Dino Lords has a teaser trailer. What we're looking for here, and we're going to see it more today than usual, is games from the AAA initiative having links to Steam so I can put them on the follow list and make YouTube shorts around them. Arcade-inspired isometric shooter Kill Knight announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. This looks like a top-down twin-stick shooter survivors type game. You didn't see too many of those announced. PlayStation Plus game catalog and classic catalog lineup for April 2024 have been announced. There's several pictures here. This Zawu, I think, is a new game. Animal Well is from Video Game Donkey's company. Do I have anything else to point out here? No, I don't think I do. Reigns Beyond for Switch and PC launches April 17th. This is yet another Reigns game, this time with a sci-fi theme to at least start with. Although, knowing Reigns Her Majesty, it could go in quite a few different directions. Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble adventure trailer, assist features, and worlds have been detailed. So apparently Sega is making a new Super Monkey Ball game. I was not aware of that. As one thing I guess the Steam Deck might be able to do is it does have gyro controls, so if the Steam Deck became popular enough, or if gyro controls just became standard in all controllers, they're not in Xbox controllers at all, to my knowledge, and I think they're in PlayStation and Nintendo Switch controllers, which I should just see if I can connect a Nintendo Switch to my Steam Deck, Joy-Con to my Steam Deck or not. But yeah, if gyro became more of a thing, Super Monkey Ball games might work a little bit better and might be more playable. Super Monkey Ball games, though, I've always felt like little weird experimental games that probably are cutesy and popular in Japan more than they are in the rest of the world. Apparently you can rewind, restart at checkpoints and use guides, which seems like they are trying to make the game more accessible for newer players. Future noir adventure game Let Bygones Be Bygones launches April 30th. I guess that's probably Byons Be Bygones. Yeah. So I assume Bions are some kind of Android simulant type things. Definitely has a Blade Hunter. Or is it Blade Runner? Is the name of the movie. Blade Runner, yeah. Has a Blade Runner feel to it, certainly. With the glowing umbrella handles. Although it was actually the sticks that would glow in Blade Runner movie. The Bridge Curse 2, The Extraction for PC launches May 9th. This is another example of a horror game that I would potentially just ignore if it weren't for the fact that they are bothering to put out a press release. Which, my biggest question I guess would be, can we get a general idea of what the Bridge Curse 1 is doing right now? Nope, it's not. No link here to a Bridge Curse 1. It's not like I'm promoting a lot of horror games. I really haven't seen a lot of horror games lately. So, this probably is one worth mentioning. Yeah. It's gone unnoticed by me, but we really have seen a bit of a downfall in horror games recently. I imagine it might pick up as we get closer to October and the end of the year, but yeah, there's a lot more Vampire Survivors type games than horror games. It does just feel like the wrong time for horror in any form of entertainment, though, when it's bright and sunny and you're getting a lot of sunlight in the summer. It really is a seasonal thing. Famitsu's review scores for issue 1845 are available on Gamatsu. They give Duel Explorer a 30 out of 40, which is pretty low. And then UFO Robot Grandizer, the Feast of the Wolves, gets a 32 out of 40, which is what I assume this game is. And that's probably two games that are not coming to the West. Duel Explorer very much could just be a little girl game. Power for Pro Baseball 2024 to 2025 launches July 18th in Japan. I don't believe these games ever come to the West. Zenless Zone Zero PS5 technical test registration is now available. Now I do know Zenless Zone Zero, the name certainly strikes me, but maybe I've just seen trailers and it hasn't come out yet. It's going to launch via a client download in Epic Games Store, iOS and Android, noticeably skipping Steam for the moment. And I couldn't really tell you what the game is. Like, looks like there's teams with little bunny mascot characters. It definitely feels kind of like it's a Danganronpa type game from the visuals, but I don't know if that's really what this is. Nope, it seems like it is maybe more of a fast-paced hack and slash game. And the danger with these kinds of fast-paced games is that they're showing off a lot of different attacks here that each seem like they're taking a second or two to do damage. So unless you're usually killing people with these finisher type moves in the first or second hit, and there's just going to be a lot more enemies on around, it does feel like it could be a fairly slow fighting game that is just having people run around to speed up the parts that are too slow in the fighting grinding element. And the flat 2D anime look here is slightly different when you convert it to a 3D CGI look. So there is just this slight inconsistency in color palettes and inconsistency in just the skin tones and the shadowing and the depiction. And yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that. Probably Monsters establishes Hidden Grove, led by former Bungie creative director, to develop multiplayer competitive adventure game. Interesting. So it's a multiplayer competitive adventure game, which I have no idea what that means. And do we really want to waste time watching a studio establishment trailer? No, I don't think we do. Moving on. Airship open world survivor RPG Echoes of Elysium has been announced for PC. No Steam link there. Star Wars Outlaws launches August 30th and has a story trailer on Gamatsu. Horror point-and-click adventure game Tales of Candleforth launches April 30th for all consoles and PC. This is an interesting cardboard cutout style. Although I question, how do you make a horror game with that visual style? Guess you could do it, but I feel like it would just be off-putting more than scary. Which, yeah, off-putting works a lot of times for people to be scary anyways. Witchfire Early Access Ghost Galleon update is now available. What is this game, Witchfire? Have I seen this game before? Well, it looks interesting. It is also in early access on the Epic Games Store. So it definitely seems like the Epic Games Store is still paying for exclusives. I don't think anybody is inherently choosing to be an exclusive on the Epic Games Store without getting some kind of pay kickback for it. But yeah, all that really does to me is make me forget games and skip games. It doesn't really motivate me to play a game from the Epic Games Store. Dice Folk is coming to Switch. It's currently available for PC. Let's see what the reviews are. Very positive as far as a game on Steam. It's not in early access and it has over 30 reviews, so I can do some rare fall list cleanup by just putting that on the wish list right now, which I notably still haven't done any fall list cleanup lately, and I'm not really planning to anytime soon. Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 DLC characters Future Saga Chapter 1 characters Android 18 from DB Super and Videl from DB Super have been announced. What's interesting about this is Android 18 over here and Videl definitely look like they have a very flat anime style in line with the way they would have been animated when they first aired on Dragon Ball Z. Which that is probably a hard style to do because almost certainly this is still a 3D model that they have just gone out of the way to flatten with shadow and shading to look like a 2D model. Now, I will say, I don't know if I've ever seen either one of these characters in these outfits, which may not mean much. Is Videl the daughter of Mr. Satan? I haven't watched Dragon Ball in a long enough time to know. That would explain the little Oni devil on the shirt here. I don't know if Videl really was a fighter. But yeah, I don't know what DB Super really has done either with the stories. If they've changed things around or not. But yeah, I do really appreciate the effort here to make an art style that is in line with what Dragon Ball would have been in my mind compared to them just making modern anime styles of the characters. that would make them feel inaccurate, to say the least. Dragon Ball overall seems like it has done a pretty decent job of being fairly consistent in its art style, and so I would hope it would still stay that way, and it probably will. Anyways, moving on. Mortal Kombat 1 DLC character Ermac launches April 16th for Combat Pack owners and April 23rd for all. Ermac, I believe, was one of the secret characters in probably Mortal Kombat 3 originally, if I was to guess. This does give me an excuse, at least, to see where we are at with Mortal Kombat 1. It's teetering around 72% overall, and in the last 30 days it's down to 61%. So it seems like it's really going in the wrong direction. Yeah. And the visuals here already look pretty realistic, so if they were to go to the extreme and literally have just HD footage of live action actors, it would probably not even be that big of a deal. They would probably try and promote the game and create more controversy to promote the game than the actual amount of controversy that would exist. Do I really have a reason, though, to try and... let's see. Try and promote Mortal Kombat 1 due to a specific character? No, I don't think so. And the premium edition of this game is $109, and the base version of this game is $70. This is a great example of an overpriced game. And I imagine if it was just cheaper, it's been as low as $35. Then if it was just at a base price cheaper, it probably would get slightly less negative reviews. That is probably something somebody could do. If you wanted to be an armchair warrior against high prices, buying games, posting a negative review, and then refunding the game might be a way of affecting that. Although I wouldn't recommend that, because it probably wouldn't be worth your time, and you can only get so many no questions asked refunds before they start asking questions under 2 hours of gameplay. It'd probably be better to just make a curated group, which I believe there has been a slight update in that somebody else has made yet another curated group, I think against, this time, Black Girls Gaming, highlighting what games they may have had some influence on, which, fine, whatever. I don't think Black Girls Gaming has had any influence either. So if people want to make curating groups and just go after companies that they feel like are too focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion, then let those people do that. It probably, if you're following all these different curated groups to exclude any game that has DEI in it, then it's probably going to speak more about you than it will speak about the games that you're avoiding. Generally, I would like to think gamers want to have fun, and if all of a sudden you're shifting what is a hobby about having fun into anything else, either as a game player or as a game developer, you've lost the plot. And both sides need to recognize that, I would say. Dinosaur-themed shop management game Amber Isle has been announced for Switch and PC. This one looks fairly cutesy, but it is also like a shop management game seemingly targeting kids, which seems like a weird combination, to say the least. I'm not sure I'd want my kids playing a shop management game and doing a job effectively in a game. The JRPG inspired turn-based fantasy RPG Runa has been announced for PC. Kickstarter campaign to launch on April 16th. So, if it's a JRPG inspired game, what does that really mean? Is that just saying that technically this team is not out of Japan, or they're not targeting Japan in particular? English, Spain, Spanish, I guess, highlights that. But yeah, what about these elements inherently have to be Japanese role-playing games instead of just being, we are making a role-playing game that happens to look a lot like other role-playing games you've seen? Inherently, even the Japanese, some of the Japanese developers have argued that they want to get rid of the phrase JRPG and just be called RPGs, which makes a little bit of sense. But the problem there is most JRPGs do have a monoculture to their appearance that is similar to what this game looks like, whereas there is a lot more variety of RPG games outside of Japan. There is also interesting hope for Spain and Spanish companies to make video games, and we'll see if there ever is an establishment of a few successful video game companies in either Spain or other Spanish-speaking nations. A lot of Spanish-speaking nations have financial problems or political problems, and so there's not a lot of stability there to make video games a lot of times. World War II real-time strategy game 63 Days has been announced for the PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Series, and PC. This might be an interesting marker in particular around just where, if any, is the fandom of World War II games, because I kind of feel like World War II games have to go the way of the dinosaur. There's just not that many people who are even alive during World War II or have any interest in it at all. Yeah. Ready Steady Ship launches April 19th. I feel like I've already chosen to make a YouTube short on this, so I'm not going to leave this tab open again. Alright, and that would bring us to the GameDeveloper.com, but the GameDeveloper.com articles are still broken. So, yeah, everything's broken. We talked about, I think, all of these stories. Let's just scroll through this and see if there's anything I may have skipped. For the most part, it really is getting to the point where almost every GameDeveloper.com article could just be part of the major news, and then I could just not try and do headlines, although it probably makes more sense to do headlines, and I really don't want to just always talk about GameDeveloper.com stories at the front. But yeah, actually my macro worked. Ascendant Studios has reportedly furloughed the majority of its staff. It actually worked for that one. Alright, well, that's going to be it for this show. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, and keep on watching. Thanks.